Hey everyone, welcome to our latest Trade to Black podcast. We all talk about edibles here and there regarding this industry and how much it'll have an impact on the overall growth of the industry. Well, we want to learn more about that. We welcome in actually the president of the number one edible company in the world, and that's what we're discussing here today. So let's welcome in TDR co-host Anthony Varrell. Good to see you, along
Good to see
with
you.
recently appointed President of Wana Brands, Joe Hodas. Good to meet you. First time on the podcast. How are things?
Thanks. Good morning. Things are great. Actually, I'm in Boulder, Colorado. It's sunny and beautiful, and people like edibles, so I can't ask for a whole lot more than that. So
Who doesn't like edibles, right? So listen, you were recently appointed. I know Nancy Whiteman, she's been in the industry, like she started this company back in 2010. And all she did in a little over a decade was basically grow this into 17 U.S. Markets, Canada, Puerto Rico, sold the company to Canopy Growth for $350 million. So I think she can probably put her feet up for a little bit and relax because she's done a lot of work. But saying all that, like, how did the relationship, I guess, start to, where you two met? And what do you think of this company now that you're basically the president of it, and what it means for the company moving forward?
well, there's actually a great backstory to that whole relationship. But I wanted to just point one thing out real quickly. We're now in 20 states as of today, launching
Okay.
New
20.
York. New York is today. That's our news for today. So we're launching in New York.
Congrats.
That's our 20th state. So yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Not where things were back in, let's say, 2013 when I first started working with a different company called Dixie, and Dixie and Wana
Right.
were kind of like the two big brands coming out of Colorado. There were a couple more, but
Yeah.
really we were the ones that had a lot of visibility, a lot of focus, and Nancy and I started to form a relationship because we see each other at the Capitol all the time. Because at that point we were constantly, at the Capitol here in Denver, trying to ensure that the laws that were just passed were going
Right.
to stay in place and that no one was going to just screw it all up. So a lot of time spent on the Hill there. Nancy and I formed a relationship, and what I didn't know is that she was kind of watching Dixie and thinking, "Gosh, the marketing and the packaging that you guys are doing, none of which will I take direct responsibility for." But I was the CMO of Dixie at the time, and had great people who were helping with that. And then I was watching Wana and thinking, "Man, those guys are doing it right, and they are constantly growing." And they got
Yeah.
into gummies, which at that point, gummies were not the established juggernaut that they are today in terms of edibles. And so, really, having the foresight to get into that space directly and become the gummy manufacturer was hugely prescient on Nancy's part. But what I would see is, we were both kind of doing this, and then we had Dixie had some oil and finance issues, and we couldn't get a hold of product. We started to decline market share. Want to continue to grow, and that kind of told the story moving forward. So that was probably mid 2014 to 2015. From there, Nancy and I would regularly get together for lunch. We, pick each other's brains a little bit. Her on marketing, me on just the wisdom of being a leader in the cannabis industry. And I bounced around to a couple different companies during that time frame. And lo and behold, as my last startup company was running out of runway and COVID was rearing its ugly head, and we realized that the financial markets were going to completely dry up at that point.
Yeah.
We decided to pivot, and Nancy and I, as I would normally do with Nancy, I'd reached out to her and said, "Hey, what do you think? What are some good opportunities you're seeing out there?" And she said, "Well, why don't you come work for Wana?" And I said, "I would be honored to do that." And that
Yeah.
was about a little over 4 years ago, and have not looked back since. So it was a
That's
great
amazing.
opportunity and a wonderful opportunity to really to get a hold of a company that was continuing to grow and continuing to set the bar for the rest of the industry.
Great.
So when we look at Wana, I mean, I've been following the cannabis industry since, let's say, 2014. Wana started in 2010. It's one of the brands that truly has staying power and has captured scale in the States. Like, what is the ethos of the Wana brand, or like what has really contributed to that overall success and being able to have consumers gravitate towards it and come back purchase after purchase and year after year? Just what's resonated with consumers in terms of
Yeah,
branding?
and actually one of the first things that I was tasked with when I came over here as the chief marketing officer was to really unwrap that ethos and understand.
Yeah.
We knew intuitively that we had a brand that people liked, and obviously the sales were reflective of that. But really unpacking that and saying, okay, what is it? What is our brand at its core? What is it that resonates with consumers, and how do we build on that? And so I really began to dig into that. And of course, as I think with any good brand, you see that the brand ethos is not something that lives just in a logo or on a website or packaging. It's the entirety of how do we treat our employees? How do we treat customers? Do we make great products that people love? Do we have the appropriate messaging? Are we investing in our communities? All of those things really all added together were Wana as the brand, not just the products, but as a result, we create products that people want, that they enjoy, and that are consistent. And so that's really the big piece. So we added not only the consistency of our products, but then we began to push into a lot more innovation in the space. And so early days, we were some of the first companies, one of the first companies to really begin to experiment with ratio products, 10-1, 21 CBD type products. And then as minor cannabinoids became more and more available, we started to push into that area with our Optimals line. And so between Optimals and then our quick products that we released, we really leaned into that innovation, and people knew that they could expect something more specific, more use case specific for them as they look for products that were for sleep, or that they wanted something faster acting than the rest of what was on the market. And so that became our real calling card with the consumer: is whatever is new, whatever is potentially the next level of edibles, Wana was going to be there first with it.
As you've grown the portfolio and developed those, from an innovation standpoint, those formulations, and we'll say those experiential products, I mean, do those skew to a certain type of consumer? Like, are you getting like an older consumer that's going more for the experiential and the formulations versus like the younger consumer that's coming in, getting like the 10 milligram fast acting gummies in, out, and just repeat buying?
So I would answer that question actually by changing it just a little bit, in the sense that I think for the use case specific products, it actually doesn't necessarily vary by age, because you look at one of our top selling SKUs, which is we have two sleep products actually, one to address falling asleep, one to address staying asleep. That is a SKU that appeals across ages, right? Because everyone seemingly has issues with sleep, from anxiety to pain, whatever the issues are, right? So that appeals to a lot of different users across the spectrum. Now, what I will say is that for a consumer who maybe is older and who hasn't been involved in edibles, that's actually a great way for them to understand that it can be beneficial to them. It's not about getting high necessarily. It's just something that helps their lifestyle. So you do get new consumers coming in through that channel, but you also get existing consumers. Conversely, for a 10 milligram fast acting, or even our regular classic line, that's going to skew, to your point, a little bit younger and a little bit more experienced consumer. But we get a good amount of both across the channels.
You talked about having a marketing background. I'd be curious to see where this side of the cannabis industry, like, how do you envision it? Do you see a lot of television commercials, sporting events, games, stuff like that, like this kind of branding involved in that in due time?
I think that in the long term, potentially. So right now, of course, there's federal issues, there's state by
Big
state issues,
restrictions.
and honestly, a lot of it is the individual advertisers don't necessarily want to welcome cannabis advertising. So there's a little bit of that as well. I think some people just
Do you think
think that
that's do you
because
think that's crazy? I would look at it in 2024, but do you think I know we're still at a Schedule 1, rescheduling's, pending, but do you think rescheduling starts to change the views in some of these companies and how they perceive it?
It does. It does. I often get asked, what will the rescheduling do? And I think there's really two major answers, and that was one of them, which is I think it does begin to lower that stigma, even though, every year in, year out, we begin, that we see more and more people being accepting of cannabis. I think once it's moved to Schedule 3, that'll loosen things up a little bit. The other piece being, of course, 280E taxes and the financial viability of the industry long term is benefited by a rescheduling. But I do think that in this day and age, 2024, 70+% people are in favor of legalization. That advertisers who look at it and say, either A, my lawyers said we can't accept dollars from the cannabis industry because you're federally legal and we can't put it in the bank. To that I say, the IRS is happy to take our taxes and put them in the same bank. So
I know.
I think it's probably okay. But also, I think they are concerned about who is the consumer, because the perception, for 65-year-old advertising exec or a lawyer who's making those rules for that particular property is thinking that it is a 21-year-old heavy consumer who isn't going to be beneficial to their overall market position. But I think what they don't realize is the vast variety of consumers who are consuming cannabis and for what reasons. I think once that light bulb goes off, you'll see more and more advertisers jumping in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The preconceived notions are changing by the day. I mean, you talk to a lot of the operators in Florida. I mean, their core consumers 50 in the state
Well,
versus what
Florida's a
used to be
unique
with like
situation too. So
yeah, yeah. I mean, in terms of like Wana on a go forward basis, I mean, I know that we had a couple of exciting announcements here in the near term, and I mean, we talk about access and intoxicating hemp derived products have been top of mind for a lot of people. I saw that you had made the announcement to partner with Happy
yeah.
to roll out a hemp derived Delta 9 version of the Wana gummy. I mean, walk me through that. What led to that ultimate decision? I mean, do you see it? You obviously see it as beneficial for the business. And why did you choose to partner versus leverage the existing infrastructure of Wana to launch that business?
So, bunch of questions there. I'll start by talking about how do we get there. So, we're actually mission driven, and I think people think of religion when they hear mission driven. But our mission is that we believe that we have products that can help enhance people's lives, and we want to get
Yeah.
them into as many hands as possible. And that's our guiding light, right? So, anytime we have an opportunity to do that, we're going to take advantage of it. That's why we're in 20 plus states, more than any other brand I think in the country. Is we feel that need, that urgency to get people our products, and so. The hemp-derived opportunity is a much expanded version of that, right? So we're no longer relegated to whatever the state will allow and what the dispensaries will carry, et cetera, et cetera. We can go directly to the consumer with our message and with our products. That said, the reason we decided to launch with Happy initially is that we've known the folks at Happy for quite some time, great operators, deep history in the industry, and a great relationship with us. And it seemed like a really good and appropriate way for us to see what's going on in the space, find out what is the sort of acceptance by consumers of a more established brand like Wana. And by the way, there are other brands that have jumped in both prior to and since that announcement. But just to understand what the marketplace looks like before we proceed with maybe a phase two, where it's a little bit more of an owned property, which down the road is something that we've got in store, some additional announcements around hemp coming up.
And do you think that did this give any, I guess, forward momentum on any sort of, I guess, additional form factors to the portfolio, as in like beverages or maybe like the vape category? I mean, do you ever see Wana expanding into those? Or I mean, you've owned the edibles category for so long. Like, do you see yourself getting outside of it, or kind of staying with the core that is edibles?
Yeah, well, so I can say, on the vape side of things, probably not, because inhalables are just not our category, and there are other people that
Yeah.
do it really well, and one of whom happens to be a partner with Canopy also, which is Jetty.
Yes.
But as far as other form factors, absolutely, it's a completely different world, right? So I came Dixie, who I mentioned earlier, was my first
Yeah.
big opportunity in cannabis. They were Dixie Elixirs. That was their primary flagship, was a beverage. And so I had firsthand knowledge for several years of the fact that in the regulated channel, beverages just weren't it. They were always 1 to 2% of the market, really tiny,
Yeah.
and only a certain consumer was consuming beverages as opposed to
Yeah.
edibles and or smokable products. So at that time, I've been pretty anti-beverages for the past 10 years. Light bulb went off for me when hemp derived became a thing, because
Totally.
I began to see not only all the news and everyone talking about it, right? Because I've seen that before, by the way. We were part of that initial wave of like beverages,
Yeah.
and you could buy it and you can drink it, and but it still didn't do anything. But now seeing them on shelf at liquor stores, also seeing firsthand my experience with beverages and understanding how you can consume them a little bit differently than maybe you do edibles, means that there's definitely, in my opinion, an opportunity there. And furthermore, I think with looking at the hemp derived category, you kind of have to take off the regulated cannabis channel hat and begin to understand CPG, direct to consumer type of modeling, and what the consumer wants when they order direct to their house. It's a completely different ballgame, right? So we have to be on top of that and understanding that gummies aren't the only opportunity in this space.
Hmm. How do you win over that consumer when they walk into a liquor store and it's like people look at alcohol or cannabis as two separate things, but now that you see, I guess, the two industries kind of intertwining with each other, how do you see the expansion? Because again, with marketing restrictions, we all know alcohol, one of the biggest reasons that it expands so much is based on the marketing opportunities, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and it's it's still very limited, right? So I want to make sure we're all
Yeah.
clear on that. It's bigger, certainly, in the fact that you can go to a Total Liquor in Minneapolis and find a cannabis product is amazing, but
Yeah.
it's still a really really limited retail distribution for cannabis beverages. That said, there's also a lot of noise in the space right now. There's a ton of companies that have just sprung up, launched beverages that don't understand formulation, that don't understand
That's
testing, and
interesting.
frankly aren't testing their products because there's no regulations that require them to do so.
Yeah.
So part of our, and I neglected to mention this earlier, part of our entrance into the market is to establish some guidelines and to say we are a responsible player, we have a history, we understand this product, we understand how to formulate, we understand how to test, all that good stuff. So back to your point, how do we win over consumers? I think it's by creating products that are consistent and getting that message out in the marketplace, which again is something that actually we're highly adept at, right? Because we've been doing that store by store, state by state for 15 years, and that's
Yeah.
what we do. So we know how to
Yeah.
get that message out. And I think leveraging the established brand name, I think, is going to be critically important to him, as opposed to these overnight fly by night companies that are just popping up. And we did a ton of research. I mean, I've looked at so many different cannabis hemp derived websites, and as a consumer, when I get to those sites, I'm like, there's misspellings, there's lack of information, there's
Yeah.
it just does not feel like something that I would want to buy, and I think we're looking to overcome that.
Anthony,
I'm very excited for where the hemp derived is going
yeah.
because we have two of the OG brands with Select and Wana entering the space that I feel like people know. Like if I asked my mom to mention a cannabis brand, she would mention Wana. I don't think she knows a single other cannabis brand in existence. And I mean, it resonates. So I mean, I'm really actually excited to see how this experiment plays out. And then you had mentioned Jetty and Canopy. I know that they had recently announced that the acreage options being exercised with the expectation to close in mid 2025. From my understanding, 2/3 of the deal is closed on the Wana side. Once those assets are amalgamated and CUSA takes shape, I mean, how does that, if any, does it change your business strategy in the States?
I don't think it changes our business strategy. And so by that, I mean, I don't think we're going to behave differently than we do currently in terms of new states to expand into. By the way, significant focus, continued focus on the regulated market. So hemp is
Yeah.
definitely something that we're, currently involved in, but our focus, our primary customer is the regulated cannabis channel customer. And so we'll continue to
Yes.
focus on that by adding new states, et cetera, new products, new SKUs, et cetera. And so I think that when you talk about strategy, it's we continue marching forward the way we've been marching. I think that the opportunities are to find synergies and to find opportunities to work together with our partners within that umbrella and understand
Yeah.
how we can best leverage each other's strengths. And that might mean going into a market, us bringing partners into a market that they're not in currently, or vice versa, that kind of thing. I don't know that it's necessarily a change in strategy per se.
Okay.
Lots on the go right now, isn't there?
Yeah.
Always. That's what I love about cannabis. I
Cannabis.
reflected when I was talking earlier about my move over to Wana. There was a period of about 3 weeks where I was like, well, maybe I want to just do something different. Maybe I want to get out of cannabis and go back into something else. And that was about a 30-minute mental dalliance, and I was like, I'm too damaged to go anywhere else. So
Yeah.
I'm here. I'm
Are
here
there,
for good.
So, I mean, what is there anything you could share with like what's next? I mean, do you guys have rolled out the formulations? You've rolled out different product SKUs. You've rolled out now the hemp derived. I mean, is there anything else on the horizon as far as like innovation and growth that you see other than let's just say direct market expansion in the States?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So you mentioned one of them, which is new product formats, and more to come on that later. But as it relates to innovation, we're just barely scratching the surface. I mean, there's so much more that we can do, and
Okay.
Yeah.
there are opportunities for that innovation both on the regulated side, but also on the hemp drive side, where perhaps some of these formulations wouldn't be big sellers in a dispensary, but when we go direct to consumer, they might actually be something that resonates with the consumer. So a lot of opportunity there. We just a couple of months ago, I can't remember the exact date, but announced our expansion into Switzerland. So that continues to move forward. That's going to be sort of a little bit of a home base for Europe. So we're really focused on figuring out the markets in Europe where we can play and what that looks like. So that's a whole new world and a business model that that doesn't exist for us today. So excited about that.
Why Switzerland? Why Switzerland? Why did that make sense?
Well, it's interesting. Switzerland, if you pay any attention at all to cannabis in Europe, it was a kind of a little bit of a sleeper. So what they did is they announced this pilot program in Switzerland that is essentially a quasi adult use program that companies and local municipalities and universities collectively can create groups that would then apply for these pilot programs. Every city and every canton, which cantons are like states, is my way to analogize it. Every city and every canton can apply for one of these pilot programs, and the government, the health department, approves it or doesn't. But then it's limited, right? So you have a number, let's say 2,000 people that are part of the pilot program, but it is quasi-adult use at that point. It's a really fascinating program, but it was kind of quiet and under the radar. And thus far, a few of these pilot programs have launched, but I think many, many more are coming in the next 6 to 12 months.
Interesting. Where did you come across that? That's you don't hear about that. When I think about Europe, we like Anthony and I talk about it. It's Germany, 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 but Switzerland is something you don't hear every day.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. It's totally a sleeper. And the way we get a lot of inbound inquiries, people from all over the world, like, oh, we'd like to partner with you. Oh, we want to do this. And it's time consuming and difficult to wade through all that to understand what the real is and what's actually happening, what is feasible from an edible standpoint. But with Switzerland, we got outreach by a group that we had a lot of respect for, that have had a lot of business dealings in the U.S. They knew what was going on over there. And with every layer of that onion that we peeled back, it was like, okay, this is actually a real thing. My ability to convey that to you in a 1 minute or less is only a function of the fact that we've been talking about it for the last 6 months. Prior to that, if you'd asked me, I would have said, I don't know how this works. I'm not really sure what the program is. It took a while for us to kind of wrap our minds around it, but now that we're there, it's great.
Well, I look at this side of the industry and it's just like, I think it's so critical and crucial. Like when I think the edible side and beverage side and the overall emergence of the industry, when we talk about some of those, I guess, just the way people perceive the industry and like look at it differently and accept it more in society every single day. Like how big and how important do you think this side, meaning the edible industry, is going to be for the growth of cannabis moving into the future? Because I see like it's huge upside potential. And I think it actually opens up the doors for a lot of marketing opportunities when you're not seeing somebody consume something or smoking or vaping. But I could be wrong. But do you view it that way?
Well, yes, I do. I would be in the wrong part of the industry if I didn't. But what I'll say is that the smokable side is always going to have an appeal to a certain demographic and a certain consumer. And honestly, smoking, combusting the plant does have a different effect, right? We know there's a more full plant effect. Our approach on the edible side is to get as close to that full plant effect as we can. And we've made products that are designed to do just that, because I do believe, to your point, the new market opportunity is, and we've been saying this from day one, and it just hasn't materialized until the last 6 months or so, and really honestly until hemp derived became a thing. That new market opportunity is the consumer that isn't looking to smoke, that is looking for something use case specific, and that really can dial in exactly the experience that they want. And edibles are really one of the few opportunities to do that. And I live with kids in the house, and smoking and vaping is just not really part of what we do in my house. So I would assume that there are a lot of people out there just like me.
Yeah. You got to get yourself an edible to your head coach in Colorado there, Deion Sanders. Anything that man touches just blows up, right?
No comment on that.
Yeah, no comment.
Prime time strain.
Yeah. Well, listen, I really appreciate you checking in, but I think like Anthony, I don't know how many times that we've had this conversation where it's like somebody comes up with an idea and the first one out of the gate isn't always the best story. And I think with this hemp derived topic right now, you brought up a good point, Joe. Walk before you run and watch this closely. This is an emerging trend right now, but there's a lot of things that I think a lot of companies may or may not be aware of. But some notable names have launched some, THC hemp derived products, which, are some pretty influential companies within the overall industry. But to your point, Joe, I think need to walk before we run and watch this part of the industry, knowing it's just exploded over the last few months.
Yep, absolutely.
Anyway, yeah. Well, listen, best of luck. Let's keep in touch. But yeah, I think it was great just to get to know you a little bit more and just the overall direction of where Wana Brands has been built over the last 10 years and most importantly, where it's going moving forward. But Joe, appreciate the time. Let's keep in touch.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate you having me on, and I look forward to that.
Thanks,
All
sir.
right. Thank you.
Take care.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching our latest podcast. What'd you all think? Is there any information that we're missing? Is there anything you want us to cover? As these industries heat up, we're getting access to more and more big hosts. So let us know the questions that you want us to ask for you. As usual, smash that like button. We want this to go viral. Click on that bell for all notifications for the latest interviews that we're doing. And as usual, let's build this community. Subscribe to our channel because we appreciate it, because we wouldn't be here without you. Thanks for watching, everyone.